Welcome to Exploring Anime with Friends, a JMO for Real podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. I'm your host, JMO. And today's friend is my co-host, Ethan. How are you doing today, Ethan?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So you ready to dive in and have some fun with this?
Yeah, I'm really ready. Really excited to be talking anime.
Excellent, excellent. So, in today's episode, we will be introducing you to the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, a supernatural action anime with dark fantasy sub-themes, released in October of 2020. For the next 20 to 25 minutes, we will be exploring the first season of Jujutsu Kaisen. First, we will take a look at the world of Jujutsu sorcerers. Next, we will meet Itadori and break down his unique relationship with Sukuna. Afterwards, we will meet some of the other students and staff at Jujutsu High. Finally, we will learn about Geto and the threat that opposes Jujutsu Society. And remember, if you like what you hear today, follow us on social media, like, subscribe, comment. All of that will be linked in the show notes. So we're just going to jump right into the Jujutsu Sorcery and Society. You want to explain to our friends a little bit about Jujutsu?
Yeah, so it's a little bit kind of tricky in the way it's explained. So it's kind of magic power, but it's a little bit derived from cursed energy. And it kind of manifests in many different ways. In the series, a lot of characters can use it. They can create what's called like a domain, special domain, like a territory. It's kind of like that's their own little realm. Like they can manipulate it in like some kind of special way.
Honestly, for Magic the Gathering fans, it feels very similar to Planeswalkers in many sense.
Yeah, and yeah, it's really interesting though because like the way that it's discussed and the author he talks about like certain things create immunities like when you make your own territory. It's really interesting though because it takes on like mixing in that supernatural element and especially when we start discussing the main character and how his comes into play. I just found it to be really neat and unique, and it's not something that's like predictable when you first, are
And
introduced to characters. Like it's different than something like a
it's a
fairy
lot
tale.
different than other animes
Yeah,
where it's like ki or chi or chakra or nen or stuff like that, where they're all more of spirit powers. This leans more towards the magical side, but it's not really quite magic. Jujutsu sorcery is really its own monster. They did a really good job developing it based off the
yeah,
supernatural, based off of cursed energy and cursed techniques, basically negative energy and negative techniques to be able to exorcise the evil spirits. And that's what they're targeting. Most people can't even see them in the world, but at the same time, it's one of those things. Those who can will realize that these cursed spirits are around everywhere. Wherever there's a graveyard, wherever a child got hurt, wherever anything tragic happened, wherever there was any fair, these cursed spirits exist. So, and really, when you think about it, like where can you go in the world today that doesn't have some level of
yeah,
tragedy or sadness attached to it, right?
yeah. And it adds it adds a lot of flavor. We'll get into it when we discuss one of the villains, but it's just there's so much like flavor you can do with that because
Yeah.
suffering negative emotions that takes so many different forms. So again, it was just from the get-go once they introduced that and they kind of attach it to the first like villain you see, and then as more villains and characters are introduced and you see that, yeah, I mean it's just it gripped me because it's again it's like very unpredictable, kind of thought-provoking too, just on the face of that. And again with that one villain I mentioned that we'll discuss later, like already I can just picture how that kind of like dialogue that he'll exhibit, and he shows some
Oh
of
yeah,
it
yeah.
that I've read so far. And yeah, I mean it's just cool. It's like thought-provoking, there's action. It's awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing that is kind of cool about it too is that most of the world doesn't know it's happening. So Jujutsu sorcerers are kind of like a secret society. They have
Yeah.
to be trained up at Jujutsu High or other ones that are located around Japan. I'm guessing around the world, but we know for a fact, definitely around Japan, that there's multiple. There's ones in Shibuya and Tokyo and all that. So they're trained in a secret society and they have to exercise these cursed spirits in a way that to where other people aren't knowing it's happening. People are aware that the supernatural happens, but they don't really know what's going on. So, in order to really become a jujutsu sorcerer, you have to go through the training, become part of Jujutsu Society. And then at that point in time, you're given a ranking. All sorcerers, cursed spirits, and cursed tools are given a letter ranking based off of how strong or how weak they might be. And yeah, no, and it's something where they can train and progress in the power. Like it's not something to where it's one and done, but it's not something that power creeps or power scales as much as other modern anime do.
And that original premise of like they're exercising spirits, only they're able to interact with them and stuff. It's got kind of shades of Bleach and Yu Yu Hakusho in that.
And there's
So
definitely, I probably should have put at the beginning, I called it dark fantasy sub themes, but there's even some level of horror sub themes to this too.
yeah. Oh yeah.
So now that we've covered the premise of the world, let's move on to our main character, Yugi Itadori. Tell us a little about Yugi and his fun personality.
Yeah, I mean, he's not self-centered, but he's a very like confident teen. He's very I was telling you this before, but the way that he's expressed in the manga, and I would assume in the anime as well, it's very expressive. And yeah, I mean, you just like I immediately grafted myself onto him because I felt exactly how he would being in this world, aside from what we'll talk about that he does in a sec to get his powers. But yeah, no, he's a very fun character.
He's very matter of the fact. He doesn't care about being
Yeah,
popular, but he could be incredibly popular. He's not the misfit or the outcast. He's just
yeah,
someone who doesn't care to be as popular as other people want him to be. He kind of just lives by his own code. Like when he went to his grandfather's deathbed, when his grandfather was telling him to stay away, the grandfather said, just make sure that he's like, people don't like me, and that's why no one's here. And he's like, just make sure to do with the rest of your life, do something to where people will be coming around to your deathbed.
yeah.
And Itadori really kind of took that to heart. And he said at that point in time, he wanted every death he ever has to experience, he wants it to be something that is fulfilling rather than tragic. And suddenly, out of nowhere, one night at Jujutsu High, want to tell us a little about those events that night?
Yeah, so he was at the school and he was approached by Fushiguro. He was approached by him, was told that there was a cursed object around. So he had mentioned that his two friends in the occult group. So they go looking for these friends. The friends had this cursed object came to life and was attacking them. Megame was trying to fight it. He was using his own jujutsu, which was summoning like dog companions.
All different sorts of animals, all different sorts of cursed beast animals.
Yeah, and then I think he started with dogs or two wolves. And so Yuji was able to see this and he was helping him fight. He like punched this creature. At the end of it, he like they contained the creature and they got this cursed object, which was a finger from an old jujutsu sorcerer, and Itadori ends up eating it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Itadori ends up eating it in order to gain power, in order to save Fushiguro and his friends. And at that point in time, Satoru Gojo shows up. Needs to test to see because it looks like Itadori has gained control of 1/20th of Sukuna's powers.
Dun dun dun.
And
Yeah.
somehow is suppressing the demon within inside. Gojo tests it, and it turns out that Itadori can in fact control Sukuna at that point in time. So after the two of them do battle, Itadori passes out and he wakes up in a scene with Gojo where he is sealed and he is bound. And Gojo's basically tells him that, yeah, no, Jujutsu Society wants to put you to death. Me, on the other hand, I want you to eat all of Sukuna's fingers because obviously you're something special. You're Sukuna's new vessel, and this is the way that we could get rid of Sukuna completely, a threat that should never resurface. And if you eat the fingers and then we put you to death, then Sukuna will never exist anymore. So Itadori comes up with that realization that, oh, I'm going to die either way, but I can help a bunch of people by eliminating this great threat, Sukuna. So he agrees to it. Like, it's kind of funny, right?
Yeah, yeah. And Gojo's his own funny little character too, with the way that
Oh,
he's
tell us about Gojo.
yeah.
No, I mean, no, we're going to go into more about Gojo later, but let's finish up a little bit of the uniqueness of Itadori Sukuna first.
Yeah, so it just becomes his own kind of voice. Well, not his own, but Sukuna will be talking to him. In some ways, he'll manifest himself. Like I believe the first one he does is he appears as a second mouth. So he's kind of talking out of Itadori's cheek, but he's able to control it. He ends up getting kind of shunted into a realm where he's just with Sukuna. And so they're interacting, and Sukuna is trying to make like an offer with him to be able to gain control of his body.
Well, you don't have
Um,
to say he was shunted into that. We can just flat out explain that. I don't mind ripping the
oh,
band-aid off right here. Sukuna, after Itadori eats the third finger of Sukuna, he does not regain control of the body immediately. Sukuna rips out the heart for when Itadori is going to come back. Itadori will die. So Sukuna kills Itadori, knowing that it wouldn't kill him permanently because Sukuna realized that he could bring Itadori back after he makes a deal with him. So while Sukuna is trying to negotiate, Gojo and company are working on bringing him back. Long story short, they do come to a deal. That's all I'm going to say on that. But yeah, you could jump right back in.
yeah, it's just it's nice having that kind of dialogue present. You got, in a sense, you got good versus evil. The way it's set up is, it's just going to be kind of a recurring thing. And so it just adds more depth and more flavor to this story because, normally you're separating the heroes and the villains. You only really get that dialogue interaction when they clash. But in this case, you don't get that. And in this case, there's, threats to these outsiders that Itadori's become attached to, like Megame and the other sorcerers. Yeah, it's just a really nice setup. I really like the interaction that they had in that little realm where
It's
it can
kind of
go.
cool, their relationship, despite the fact that they don't get along at all.
Yeah, and there's a funny part, and I love these like little sight gags. I don't know how this was done in the anime, but there's a part in that when they're making the offer, and he just says like Itadori's like, he's very stubborn. He's like, no, I'm not gonna do this. And Sukuna's like, all right, how about this? If I like beat you, we'll do my deal, and if you beat me, we'll do yours. And he says like, okay. And he like no sooner does he start to say okay, then the next panel it shows his head gets like punched clean off.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. There's a lot of sight gags. There's a lot of shout outs, but no, it definitely is very well constructed. You can tell that manga and anime exist in this universe with the amount of shout outs that are given. If you're already getting hooked to this, like we are, we recommend that you watch it for yourself on Crunchyroll, home to over 1,000 anime and simulcast, both subbed and dubbed. That website will be listed below in the show notes with all of our social media too. So let's just continue to move right on. Gojo, I paused you from talking about him earlier, but yes, tell us a little about Satoru Gojo.
Yeah, so Gojo's kind of he's like more of like the kind of flamboyant-ish character, at least how he's depicted visually in the manga and some of what he says. He can alternate between more silly and more serious. You see the serious side when he takes his headband down, although he still like exudes full confidence before that. The first fight you see him in, the
He
character
absolutely
he's
destroys Jogo.
yeah, the character he's fighting, he just
Yes,
yeah,
and
you
Gojo
said
and
the same.
Jogo are definitely like the same exact name with the G and the
Yeah,
G in that. It's
yeah.
kind of ridiculous.
And
They do
he's
that a
just
few times.
yeah, and he's just, he's like, "Oh no, like this is easy. Like you're easy." And he said it to someone else too at one point. And he's like, "Oh yeah, no, like this I think it was like the butler kind of character." And they're like, "Oh, are you worried?" And he's like, "Oh no, like this isn't a threat to me at all." So he's very confident in himself, but you also see that and you're like, "Yeah, no, like he's the real
Yeah,
deal."
he wields the power of infinity and the domain of ultimate void. So it's one of those things where as things get closer to him, they slow down. So it's one of those things where it's practically impossible to touch him.
Yeah.
But we're going to leave that at that for right now and move on to some of the other classmates. When Itadora gets to Jujutsu High, he is put in a class with two other first years. One of them is Megume, and he meets Nobara Kukusaki. So, want to tell us a little about Kukusaki for a moment?
Yeah, there's not so much I can really say right now. She hasn't had too much of a part yet. She's kind of very similar to Itadori, where she's very self-confident in herself, even though she's also starting out, and she ends up getting herself in a little bit of trouble when her and Itadori are on their own little mission. But yeah, I mean, she's kind of a plucky character like him, still hasn't had too much fleshed out. there's a really one of the older, one of the upperclassmen in their academy. Actually, I think it was a neighboring academy, but they were kind of
Yeah.
like picking on her and started to brawl with her, and she was holding her own really well.
He
They
has a
had to
pretty cool
literally
curse technique too, with
the
the
gun.
voodoo doll and the hammer and nails.
Yeah, and the other person had to literally pull a gun on her to stop
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah, that came out of nowhere.
yeah,
But that was the group, the Tokyo branch of the Jujutsu Society. So,
yeah,
because they were meeting together for a inter-school competition. So at that point in time, Itadori rejoins the group when they're getting ready for the competition, and he meets the other second-year students, including Koge Inumaki, Panda, and Maki Zenin. So just to go through them really quickly, Toge Inumaki has a cursed voice technique, and he has to speak in things in food terms like salmon.
yeah,
All the time it's salmon for everything. Panda is three cursed spirits fused into one. It's kind of interesting. It's very unique that you can have cursed dolls and you can fuse spirits into them to give them power. And Panda has three different ones fused into him, and he looks like a panda. And then Maki Zenin 100% has no cursed energy. She can't see the spirits or anything, but she knows how to hold her whole own hand-to-hand combat even without seeing the spirits. When they actually go and they meet the other students, the one that got to highlight him for a moment, Itadori kicks it off with Toto really well. Do you want to tell us a little about the way Toto introduces himself to people?
yeah. So Toto started off, and the first thing he's doing is pressuring Itadori to tell him what his preferences are in a woman.
Yeah, no, that's how he leads off. He needs to find out if the person's a boring person or not. So he asks Itadori what his style of woman is, and eventually, after some thought, the Itadori is like, I like someone tall who has a well-endowed posterior, like Jennifer Lawrence. So yeah, and after that, Toto and Itadori just kind of hit it off completely. The bromance is real, and it is absolutely beautiful. And it goes from them fighting each other as opponents to Toto actually training him during the scene. Another one that Itadori learns a lot from during his time where he was assumed to be dead was Kento Nanami. And one of the things that really, typically I would throw this over to you, but I want to take this one. The thing that makes Nanami probably my favorite character of the series is he has this monologue about getting old. You wouldn't understand because what it's like to get old. And Itadori's like, I've faced my fair share of struggles. And he's like, that's not what I'm talking about. He's like, getting old is when you go to your favorite convenience store and realize they don't sell your favorite bread anymore. And I was like, oh my goodness. Oh no. Like, I'm getting old. Like, I literally went to Panera today and saw that they didn't no longer had roast beef on the menu. And I left disappointed and went somewhere else.
Yeah.
Oh, then it's like that would hit hard when I heard his definition of getting old. I was like, oh my goodness, how many times has that happened? So, is there anything you want to add about Nanami?
Yeah, he's just got a fun personality. It's like a very overworked worker type.
Yeah,
He sees things as like tiresome. So the first fight that you see him in, he's looking at his watch and he's like, ah, like looks like this is overtime. So he's just a really fun guy like that. And then his power, his sorcery is really cool. He has this wrapped blade and he can create like a vital spot in targets.
yeah,
And yeah, it's just really neat.
yeah. It's pretty cool. He definitely has probably more of appeal to older people that are watching the show than younger people that are watching the show because he, like Larry the Everyman, he epitomizes being an adult very well.
Yeah.
And one of the battles, the big battle that he had that really showed what he could do was versus Mahito. We're going to be looking at some of the threats now. Mahito, do you want to explain this crazy manic guy?
Yeah, so Mojito is what I was alluding to earlier because when you mentioned how like curses and negative energy form, he's formed by humans, like human suffering. So right off the bat, you're like, holy, like this must be, a crazy powerful cursed spirit. And he is in a movie theater and he's just turning people into monsters. Like he's putting cursed
Yeah,
energy into them and it's just deforming and reshaping them. And so like
and ultimately killing them.
yeah, because they can't handle it. And he also like has his own that he'll like inside himself. It's like his own little sick thing. Like he has one that he was seeing how small he could make someone, and he had another that he was seeing how large he could make someone.
He's very
Yeah.
sick, twisted, demented, yet almost very childlike at the same time, because it's more
Yeah.
about curiosity and learning and exploring his powers and trying to figure it out. Very childlike in some ways, despite the fact that he's a cursed spirit serial
Yeah.
killer that deforms and turns people into monsters before ultimately killing them. He works alongside three of the more natural cursed spirits: Jogo, a volcanic one; Hanami, not to be confused with Nanami. Yes, they just switched a N and an H, and yeah. And this one comes across as more of a natural earth spirit, and Dagon, who comes across as a cursed water spirit. Jogo and Gojo get a big fight at the beginning. Well, it was big for Jogo, but it was more or less a flex for Gojo. I guess it's a
Yeah.
pretty big deal that Jogo made it away alive as a head. A very hot-headed individual, pun intended. Honestly, I really like, out of all the villains, Jogo's definitely my favorite. And then Hanami comes across as very sagely, very creature of nature, and can spring up the roots from everywhere, and has a lot of different flower-based powers. It's very deadly, and actually led an invasion upon Jujutsu High. But anything you want to add about Jogo, Haname, or Dagon at this point?
I agree with you. So far, Jogo's gotten the most treatment, and yeah, he's got a very fiery personality. Like blows up a whole friggin' restaurant.
Spoiler alert.
Like he just has no. Again, it's another pun. He has no chill. Like he just is. Yeah, he's
We're full of the
very.
puns.
Yeah, it's just a nice juxtaposing him with the other threats. It just works like really well. They
But
all
the
have their
crazy
own
thing is,
personality.
Jogo is only really a threat because he views humanity as the imperfect beings. He's like, "Well, all of us cursed spirits are what we are. We don't pretend to be something. Humanity's fake, humanity's false." And yet somehow we as truths, because when you really think of it, he's kind of right. They as truths are the bad guys when
Right.
humanity is living falsely and deceiving itself and thinking that they're the good guys. So really, it is a twisted worldview, but he's not just a violent kill 'em all thing. He just wants a fair treatment where cursed spirits can live and not be persecuted.
Right. It's got a lot of that nice like philosophizing, the depth of their motivations and stuff. Yeah, it makes sense because I mean they are truths. Like they were born out of human fear or negative emotions and stuff. So it's like, there's nothing false about that. Whereas, yeah, like you said, humans are living amongst lies and everything. So
And we're just going
yeah.
to briefly mention that they do have a leader. The leader, it's not much is revealed about him too early on. And we're not going to reveal too much about him either, because I think we gave you enough today. But the leader's name is Gato, and they're following his master plan and getting ready for Shibuya on Halloween night that year. For this episode, we just basically looked at the world of the Jujutsu sorcerers. We met Itadori and Sukuna and saw their unique relationship. And then we met some of the other students and staff at Jujutsu High. And finally, we closed out by taking a look at some of the threats that they are facing and will be facing in the near future. How much do you like Jujutsu Kaisen?
I like it a lot. It's got a lot to it. I mean, it's kind of playful vibes that you would expect from that kind of a manga. It's definitely got that kind of
Shonen.
playful spirit. Yeah, shonen. But it also, again, the world that this is set in and the way these curses are born and everything just allows for a lot of nice depth to it and a lot of like, moments where you'll catch yourself thinking and reflecting on what's being said.
As for me, it's been a really enjoyable series. Really, when it comes down to it, I'm not sure if it's enough to crack my top 10, but it's a series that I am enjoying currently right now. Look forward to enjoying it more in the future. I hope you guys had as much fun exploring the first season of Jujutsu Kaisen as we did, and consider watching the anime. So if you like what you heard today, make sure to listen to us on Apple and Spotify. All of our podcasts are there. All of the J-Mail for Real podcasts are on there. Check us out on social media and interact with us there. It is linked in the show notes. Until next time, this has been Exploring Anime with Friends, a J-Mail for Real podcast. Let's explore together.